What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 366. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, just like every week, I was just in Denver. He's still there. It's Luis Scott-Vargas. LSV, how are you, sir?
Well, today was the first snowfall of the season, which is actually really late because it's December 7th right now.
Uh-huh.
Which is the first time I had to get the trusty snow shovel out of
oh, no. You had to do that. I love making fun of you for that snow shovel. I remember last year.
Oh, yeah. It was a light dusting, so it actually was fine. It took me about 5 minutes, but it will take longer later in the season, and I am not looking forward to that.
I wish I could run the full brags right now, but I really can't. It's cold as hell here. Well, that didn't make sense. It's really cold here, and it's supposed to snow tomorrow. So I'm going to Las Vegas.
I didn't even know
instead.
It snowed in Seattle.
It almost never does, and you should see it. It's a total mess. Anyway, we had a good time at the GP. Thanks for being a gracious host. You brought us donuts, food, euros, everything. And but now we're back to business, and we've got a little bit of a different look at the podcast this week. I just very occasionally like to throw our listeners a big fat curveball and give them a totally different type of show, and that's what we're going to be giving them today. Though I'm going to keep that a secret for a minute, because before we get into all that, I got to mention our sponsor, ChannelFireball.com. Of course, they're the number one place to go to buy anything you need magic related on the internet. That means sealed products. So if you want to get a box, or maybe, when the new sets come out, you like to order a box so you can draft with your friends. CFB is the place to go for it. If you need singles to fill out a deck, they're going to have them in stock for you at good prices. They're going to get them shipped out quick. And I love to talk about the free content. And the reason is because it lines up so well with what we try to do here on LR. We have a very focused show here where we really, our goal is to try to help you improve at Magic. That's the number one thing that we try to get done on this show. And I'll tell you what, so does Channel Fireball. And they always have. Since the beginning, they've put up helpful articles. Just right now, looking at the website, if you're a constructed player, for example, and you saw some of these sweet new decks at the GP, right at the front page on Channel Fireball, you can get a blue-black Metallurgic Summonings deck guide from Bobby Fortinelli, who's the one who played it at the GP and did quite well. You can get a blue-white Panharmonicon deck guide from Eric Froelich, and you can get a Marvel, looks like green-black Marvel deck and sideboard guide from Neil Oliver right on the front page. So if you want to figure out what the new tech is in Standard, it's there. You're going to find it right away. And hey, if you want to watch some limited stuff, Luis does videos. I do videos. I see Neil Oliver, very good limited player, Neil Oliver, who's in fact been a guest host on the show. He's got his second Kaladesh draft video up on the site as well. So you can see and get some other takes. I know that people really appreciated that last week when Paulo came on the show and gave us a different angle on Kaladesh draft. And, it's always good to have as many voices as possible before you make your own decisions. And you can see some more of those at channelfireball.com. Also, Patreon. That's the way that you can support the show directly if you'd like. It is optional, but you do get some cool bonuses for signing up, including a thank you card in the mail. And you get access to the Patreon feed, which gives you some insider photographs on occasion, shall we say. Also, you can get your you can also submit questions for the question of the week, and I'll often put a bunch of other little tidbits in there. Also, I like doing giveaways. I've really kind of found my stride with this, and I've got another giveaway. I'm going to give away Limited Resources deck box and a couple packages of sleeves, as well as a sticker, and this one is going to go to West Oldenboiving. Wes is from the Netherlands, all the way in Amersfoort. And I wanted to say thank you to Wes, and we really appreciate your patronage. I'll be sending that off next week for you. And, just by being a patron, you get eligible for any of these giveaways as well. So you can check it out, patreon.com/limited resources. Now, I mentioned it. You get to submit questions for the question of the week. And this one comes from our friend Peter. Peter says, I really appreciate the level up that Luis provided regarding basic land power rankings. Not really sure that was meant as a level up, Peter, but he says, can we look forward to further power rankings for other Magic essentials like tokens, spin down counters, and dice? I think we can all agree that a well-informed power ranking of dice would help mitigate the role of luck in the game. Peter, thank you for the insightful question. Luis, are you, are we going to see a recurring sign off that are power rankings?
Well, what I can do right now is give you kind of my philosophy on tokens, spin down counters, dice, paper, and pens.
Oh, if don't bring them.
If this is going to be useful. When I show up to play a match of Magic, professional level Magic, I show up with a deck box full of a sleeved deck, 40 cards if it's limited, 60 cards and a 15-card sideboard if it's constructed. And I show up with a will to win. I don't show up with anything else.
He has nothing ever. I've seen you do this 100 times in the feature match area at the Pro Tour.
I'll sit down. I'll ask my opponent to borrow a piece of paper. I'll ask a judge to borrow a pen.
Yes.
I try to keep the pen, but I don't always succeed.
You try to steal the pen from the judge, but sometimes you fail at that. Okay.
I ask my opponent if they have dice to roll. If they don't, I ask the people next to us. If I need tokens, those I'm actually prepared for. I use my extra sleeves as tokens. And that really and if I need dice during the game for like a planeswalker, for example, like I remember playing a deck that used multiple different kinds of token and dice. This is the black-green Cryptolith Rights Collected Company deck. That did not prompt me to bring these things to the table. Because, look, and there's a reason for this. And it's not what you think. Okay, maybe it's partially what you think.
What, that you're a social leach who's taking advantage of everybody around him?
It's actually, Marshall, because I value mindfulness. And I clear my mind of as many distractions as possible. And I don't want to keep track of all these other things. And I don't want to bring a bag with me. So all I do is just carry my deck, and that's it. And that, I believe, is one of the biggest secrets as to why I do well in Magic.
Wow.
It's just all mindfulness.
Yeah, mindfulness. Yeah, you're being very mindful of your opponents and the judges who have to bring pieces of paper for you everywhere.
It's the same reason that during days of tournaments, I never use my phone. I never check Twitter or Twitch or anything like that.
So are you going to give us more power rankings or what?
I will power rank things that deserve power rankings. Okay,
because I as much as the smoke screen is up here, I really actually liked Peter's question from I think that's a kind of a sweet recurring.
Right. I can certainly provide more power rankings. I do have opinions on things. Oh, wait, no, sorry, that was the wrong thing to say. I do have facts about about what order things should be.
Right, facts, right.
But when it's something like dice or pads of paper, they are all equally important to me.
Yeah, well put. By the way, speaking of recurring sign-offs, got a little recurring sign-off for you later on, Luis, just to plant that seed. Now, in lieu of that, we're actually going to skip the Crack-A-Pack this week, so that might give away what the recurring sign-off is. But anyway, because we've got, like I said, a little bit of a different take on the podcast, and this actually goes back to the John Laux days of LR, where he convinced me at one point to let him. So he kept saying, I want to do an interview podcast. I want you to interview me, or I want you to interview, or the other way around. And I was like, no, we shouldn't do that. Like, people don't care. They want to hear about Magic. That's it. We're not going to do this. Like, do you have a cat or whatever podcast, which by the way I do. And but then he gave up, and then a few months later he convinced me to let him dictate any topic he wanted for the show. And I thought, sure, that's a sweet idea. So he's like, okay, I can do anything I want. I'm like, yes, you have full reign. He's like, but I'm not going to tell you before the show starts what it is. And I'm like, all right, whatever. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? And he decided to interview me. That was the topic of the show. He put the idea that he had into action, and the show ended up being a very, very popular episode of the podcast. And I realized that mixing it up a little bit occasionally for our listeners actually had a pretty big benefit. And I was talking to Luis earlier today, and I thought, this would actually be a good episode to do it, because we're really deep into the format. This is, of course, the fall set, so it goes on forever. And we can always come up with level up topics, and we will, don't worry. But today we're going to interview each other. And I actually get to start off. Luis, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions about kind of your history with Magic, and we'll dive into your brain there and figure out what you've got. And then you're going to turn the tables on me and ask me some questions too. And hopefully it gives you a little bit better of a look at what makes Luis and I tick. And maybe that can help frame some of the information and attitudes that we have on the show. Or maybe it's just interesting. I don't know. We'll see. All right. So Luis, I'm going to kick things off. I despise cliche Luis. I really try not to let the show slip into that mode, and I really don't like talking about the same stuff that everybody always talks about. So I'm not going to ask you.
How did it feel to win the Grand Prix?
Yeah, how did it feel to win the Grand Prix? When did you start playing Magic? I'm not going to do that. I want to touch on some important points, but I want to take it from a little bit of a different angle. And so where I want to start off was when you started to become a professional Magic player. And I want you to tell us when you first started thinking of yourself in that light, because it's such a nebulous thing, right? It's not like you sign a form and you go, okay, now I'm a professional Magic player. It doesn't work that way. You start doing some content, you start having some success. Maybe you make it to a high level on the Pro Tour Club, and then you wake up one day and you're like, well, I guess this is what I'm doing. That's how most people have described it to me. What was your transition like where you started to realize, I'm actually a professional Magic player now?
The year I say that is the first year I was a professional Magic player was 2007, because that was the first year I played at all the Pro Tours.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of that year, I was Platinum. I mean, I was the equivalent of Platinum. It had a different name back then. It was called Level 7, which, let me tell you, not as flashy as Platinum.
Or shiny.
But, yes. But so 2007 was the first year that I truly thought of myself as a professional Magic player, which dovetailed with being the year I graduated from college and actually had to be a professional something.
Yeah. Were you making content yet at the time?
I was. I had been making content for about a year at that point.
How did you get that gig?
So what happened was myself and actually Paul Cheon qualified for Worlds by finishing first and third at U.S. Nationals. Paul was first and I was third. That put us both on the national team. We both lived in Northern California at the time, in a little town called Davis, where the university I went to was. And the owner of a nearby card store, but also a website, Blackborder, if you've heard of it, blackborder.com.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
/adventureson.com. It was both those websites. The owner, Abram, he knew us. We had gone to his store many times, and he was like, he wanted to sponsor us, and he wanted us to make content for him for his website. So that's kind of how that we got our foot in the door.
Okay, so you started doing that. And, one of the things about being a pro Magic player that I think a lot of people don't fully grasp, I think they look at it kind of as this like glamorous lifestyle where they just see you traveling around the world, get to play Magic, get to be on camera a bunch, and it just looks like it's all fun and games. But, the truth of the matter is that it's not like that, right? The money situation is significantly different for your average pro level Magic player. And, I know that making content usually ends up being a big part of the puzzle.
I don't think there's never been a year where I didn't make content. Like I from the beginning, I realized that you had to make content. Well, you don't have to. There are professional Magic players who do not make content, but it never made sense to me to not make Magic content, both because that's how you can protect yourself from losing in tournaments. One of the goals I set out for myself, which I have at this point, I feel pretty secure I will always have, is never go to a tournament where I have to win money to keep doing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. I never wanted that to be the case. I never wanted a tournament to be a make or break situation, and it never has been. And part of that was producing content, because even if you do poorly, you can still talk about what you did. You can still, write an article, you can still do a deck tech, and there's a lot you can do there. And the other part is I really like creating content. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was something I found very rewarding.
Did you think you were good at making content early on?
No, not really.
Mm-hmm.
I actually started with a video series where it was just like me and a camera, just like talking about Magic, and it was like very difficult for me to do because I was not very outgoing, and especially since I didn't have a ton of Magic credibility or anything at the time. Yeah. It was like, well, why should people listen to me? I mean, I'm just some dude talking about Magic and, building sealed decks or talking about this constructed deck or whatever. And I would write articles too. Actually, around the same time period, I would write articles for Star City Games.
So hold on a second though. You were just talking into a camera, just you?
Mm-hmm. It's not good.
Dude, that's hard.
Yeah. I actually think it was great because I did it for like almost a year. Just that, like, I don't even remember.
Wait, can I dig these up?
I honestly don't know, but I will let you know how you might be able to.
I would like that.
Somewhere in the archives on blackborder.com, perhaps. Mm-hmm. But This was a long time ago. I didn't know how to talk to a camera. I don't think I knew how
Yeah.
to interview very well. I think it was actually a lot of practice because just staring into the soulless lens of a camera
Oh
and just,
God.
having like people watch that afterwards is just really tough, but it got me used to it at least.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so at this point, you felt like you were, being productive enough as an adult. In other words, making enough money,
In
right?
quotes, sure.
Yeah, right. I didn't want to use that term with you, but you know what I mean. Where you found yourself with enough of an income to keep doing this. And then for you, was there ever any question about whether that's what you wanted to do? It would occur to me that this is a pretty big break from the norm. This isn't what most people's parents envision for their kids when they're growing up.
Well, it's funny how the timing ended up working out because, that in that last year of college, I actually for Pro Tour Geneva, it was the second Pro Tour of the year. I was qualified for it, but I wasn't qualified for any Pro Tours past that. So I needed a top 50 finish, or top 32 at the time, actually, to qualify for the next Pro Tour. And I flew out on Thursday morning, got to Switzerland on Thursday night, played the Pro Tour Friday morning, flew out Sunday morning at 6 a.m. to get back for a Monday morning final because it was my last quarter of school.
Dear God.
And I did top 32 the Pro Tour on the way there and queued for the next PT, and I was able to string those together. But I was balancing those things with all of the intent to be well, I'm going to graduate from college, a degree in political science, which I did end up doing, and get a job. But then at the end, I around the same time I hit platinum and was well, I have this job to making content. I have this, this year of professional Magic ahead of me that I can take it. Let's see how this goes.
Now, not that long after that, you did get your first Pro Tour top 8 and won as well.
Yeah, it was Berlin in 2008, and it was actually pretty funny because I was doing very poorly that season. It was nearing the end of the season. Berlin was the third, or I guess the second to last Pro Tour, with Worlds being the last Pro Tour. This is back when Worlds was just a Pro Tour.
Right.
And I had something like 14 pro points going into that Pro Tour, which is not good. I don't know if I'll be qualified for the Pro Tours next year.
Oh, no.
And I was thinking okay, well, this was fun. I played Magic, from 2007 to 2008 or whatever. But the real world beckons. But then, for better or for worse, I did win the Pro Tour. I finished 12-4 in the Swiss, got in on tiebreakers, and then managed to come down from being 0-2 in 2 matches in a row to winning the PT.
So, and at this point, were you? Did your mentality shift about the real world beckoning and stuff? Did you know that this was going to be a shift in your life and your career, or was it hey, sweet, I won the Pro Tour, what's next? What happens at the next tournament? I just wonder, because I think when I look at your career as a whole, I mean, that was a major deal, right? You winning that set the stage for the next 3 to 4 years of your career. And the next 3 to 4 years of your career were fantastic on basically every level. And I'm going to talk about ChannelFireball in a minute, which was a big part of that, but also your professional Magic career. You really didn't look back, from that moment, and just all of a sudden became a face that we all knew, and one of the game's greats. Did you realize that at the time? The next day, did you wake up and go, dude, I'm this is a whole new world for me? Or was it more just oh, that was sweet, what's next?
It was kind of in the middle. It wasn't just oh, that was sweet, what's next? It was wow, maybe I am good at Magic. Maybe this is something I can do. I mean, getting your first PT top 8 is a very big deal for someone who's played professional Magic, someone who's supposed to be good. I had been playing for long enough. I had been on the pro scene for 2007 was the first year I played all the PTs, but I did well at Nationals in 2006, and so not having a PT top 8 always made me wonder was I actually good enough for this? Was I cut out for it? And looking back now that I know a lot more about how luck and variance works, I'm not as concerned. I would not have been as concerned about that, but I of course didn't know those things.
Sure.
So it was vindication. I didn't really think much about what's happening next, but it was enough money and enough pro points that I was just going to be platinum the next year, that it's well, okay, this worked out. This was a good year. I'm not counting on winning a Pro Tour every year, but this also, I mean, I wasn't unaware that it raised my profile within the game, and I could use that to build more on the content side.
And somewhere around this time, maybe you can explain exactly how the timing went. But, you said you were making, content for Adventures On, but then Channel Fireball somehow came around. Can you give us the rough timeline on how that happened?
Yeah. So basically it was after Worlds 2008, which I ended up top 16ing. I was very lucky that year. I talked, was approached by, I talked to John Sasso and Mashi, who are, two of the owners of Channel Fireball. Right. And John, of course, the president and CEO of ChannelFireball.com.
Yes, much hailed, yes.
Yes, as his official title goes. And so the funny thing is, there was actually some history there too, because Channel Fireball used to be Superstars of Sports. That was the original name, or before there was a Channel Fireball. And it was a game store in California, in Cupertino, then San Jose, which had been open since 1993, something like that. And wow. I actually had gone there a lot. I knew John, and it was, I had gone there even when I was much younger as a Magic player. And it's kind of funny. I actually used to trade in cards to the store. I got my set of Power 9 from Superstars.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, I would trade for their buy list. They were buying Patron Wizards for $6 and Coat of Arms and Missaras, and I'd trade for big stacks of those and trade them in for a Mox Jet. I'm not even kidding. This is exactly what happened.
Oh, man.
So I already knew those guys, and they had been kicking around the idea of starting a content site. Before this, they did not. They were not a big internet Magic retailer, and they wanted me to be one of the people who helped found it, and kind of start off as the editor, as well as kind of the face of the website. It was a tough decision. I mean, I'm in retrospect, obviously, I'm very glad of the decision I made. I've loved being a part of Channel Fireball. I kind of love the people I've worked with there, and I think it's been quite successful. But it was a really tough decision at the time because Adventures On, Abram had taken a gamble on me and Paul when we were literally nobody knew who we were because we were just local Magic players at his store.
Right.
And he supported us throughout that, sent us cards, paid us a very generous amount of money for the, promoting his website and writing articles and doing videos. So making that jump to an unknown, this thing doesn't exist yet, we're going to create it, was tough. But at the end of the day, the potential to grow something and build something from the ground up was really alluring. So that's kind of where that started. And actually, the first Pro Tour where basically Channel Fireball launched was Pro Tour Kyoto, where I ended up losing to Nassif in the finals. We actually recovered that match.
Yeah.
And that was the kicking off point for Channel Fireball. It was actually kind of perfect. It was like, all right, I got second to the Pro Tour, and here's this new website.
Did you come up with the name?
No, that was Mashi, John, and Alex Alapin, I believe. I don't know if anyone else was there, but that for those who don't know, you might think I had something to do with it because it's such a combination of jokes. It's first of all, there's the cards Channel and Fireball, right? This is a card combo from Alpha that wins you the game. Channel Fireball was one of the most iconic combos in the game. Second, the goal or the impetus behind the website was have TV channels where people could watch other people playing Magic. Remember, this is 2009. There wasn't streaming.
No, streaming was not a thing.
There weren't draft videos.
Yeah, there's only a few. There was that Moto Sharks or whatever it was called had some videos. It was just a couple of little sites.
It just wasn't a thing. It was all articles, and their brainchild, which they came up with in John's garage as they're drinking at midnight. Is what if we just recorded people playing Magic, and that was and just be Channel Fireball, the TV channel.
Yeah, that's sweet. And you can see that in the logo too.
Yeah. There's a TV with the Channel Fireball, the weird fireball with no eyes, jumping out, and doing draft videos was basically our differentiator from the beginning. We had articles. We actually, John Locks was one of our original writers.
Yeah.
He was one of the original crew, and but we had draft videos, and that was, I think, part of what set us apart. And we had some of the people who were well-known players at the time, myself being one of them. The first article on the website was my Pro Tour Kyoto report.
Oh, that was the first one?
Yeah, I couldn't find it anymore. We've lost a lot of articles over the years as we migrated a few times, but it is unfortunate.
Yeah, and I am really curious about the draft videos though, because I remember watching your draft. I remember God, it must have been right near the start seeing some of your videos, and they got popular really fast. I mean, it must have been weird for you because it was like you said, a burgeoning medium. It hadn't really been solidified as just a thing that every website put out. There was a couple of sites that had them and a couple of random people on YouTube or whatever. But, all of a sudden they became a thing. And I remember stuff about your old videos. Like I remember you had cats that would come up and yell and, like little stuff like that just added some personality and stuff to the videos. But it had to be kind of weird for you, right? Like you were kind of blazing a trail there and blazing it big.
It was definitely a learning process, figuring out how to make them better, figuring out like that people really did like these. They were very interesting to make, and I think that by the time I did any sort of like Magic coverage, I had been doing draft videos for over 5 years. So certainly that was a good training ground for that. It was just me getting used to talking about Magic. Did
you have a feel right away for how you wanted to do it, or did you just grow it naturally? Because you ended up, where your draft videos don't perfectly reflect the play that you would make at the Pro Tour, you certainly lean towards the entertainment side of things, but also you're not just strictly goofing around, right? Like you will push boundaries you wouldn't normally push. Like I said, at the Pro Tour, at a GP or whatever, like in your drafts. But at the same time, you always have an underpinning of like an attempt to win the draft still.
I think in the beginning I was potentially more serious. I mean, look, I still try to play as best as I can. I don't like playing poorly in the draft videos. The main thing that you have identified correctly is that sometimes I will make picks that I wouldn't in a more high stakes situation. And part of that is entertainment. I want to be entertaining, and I think it's more fun if I'm having fun. Part of that too is I think it's more interesting to go down certain roads rather than to draft the red-white curve-out deck every time if you think that's what's open or what's good. But I do say that they vary because there's some videos where I will just one of the first drafts I did in Kaladesh, I just drafted red-white vehicles and finished the draft in 30 minutes, and that was just me doing what I could to maximize my percentage to win the game at every point. So
right.
There was, there was variation. There were some standout drafts where I certainly wasn't trying my hardest to win, like the draft where I drafted Lorthos.
Oh, the Lorthos draft.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not even like a joke. Like that draft video by itself, I think, went a long way towards cementing the website as being a place where people could find stuff they wanted to watch.
And remember the Oblivion Ring?
Oh yeah,
video. These are the stuff of legend now. Like these are some of the most funny. People still talk about those videos, even though it's been years since those were out. And yeah, you really found your niche. Now, around this same time, Team ChannelFireball formed, right? You had the website, you had your stuff going on, but the world of professional Magic players and the teams that they play for is a little bit shrouded, I think, for your average viewer, like a Pro Tour viewer, where they think like there seems to be like, okay, well, what team are you testing with versus which team do you make content for or even personally sponsors you? And there's some weird gray areas that pop up there. I wanted to ask you about two things. One, if you could explain to us how that works, just for people that get confused about like why they see Brian Kibler used to test with Team ChannelFireball, but he writes for another website. Like what is going on with that? And then the other one is, why don't you answer that for me? Because I have a little bit more in depth on the second question. So how does that actually work behind the scenes?
So it's not as complicated as it might seem, but there's a couple things muddying the waters. First of all, there's the team of players you physically play test with. And, that could be Team ChannelFireball, that could be Team MTG Mint Card, that could be Team Eureka, and Eureka there is not the name of a business, that's just the name of the team.
Right.
There's also the business who sponsors your team, and not every team has a sponsor. Ideally, they line up because that makes the most sense. I mean, Team ChannelFireball, sponsored by ChannelFireball, with players who create content for ChannelFireball
has a nice ring to it. Yeah.
Yes, very simple. You do have some situations where, yes, on team, the original Team ChannelFireball, Brian Kibler was on the team basically the whole time, and yeah, he wrote for Star City Games, so he wore a Star City Games shirt. And yes, that's a little confusing, but the way the team was formed was organic, and the website ChannelFireball did not dictate who was on the team. That was chosen by the players.
I see.
So yeah, sometimes you get mismatches where you have, team face to face, but Mike Sigrist does write for a different website and he's wearing their shirt. So there's the team sponsor who sponsors the name of the team and generally will sponsor the majority of players on the team. Occasionally there are outliers on each team of people who aren't sponsored by the main sponsor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, when it came to actual Team Channel Fireball forming, you guys have been given credit for ushering in a new era at the Pro Tour, which is the era of the super team. At least the prevailing winds say that the teams used to be smaller. They would be, between 4 and 8 players or something along those lines. And then you guys came along and put together a team with 16 plus players. And we're talking about excellent players too. Not necessarily just the people that live in my area, or the people that are my friends, but you are also bringing in some top talent from around the country and all meeting up in one spot. Is that true? Is that how it actually went down?
So yes and no. First of all, there were teams in Magic before Channel Fire. We did not invent the concept of the team, but what happened, about 2010 was really where we formed. What had happened was a lot of those previous big teams, Your Move Games or the Jumbles, when they had a ton of people from a bunch of different teams, those teams had largely fallen apart. Those players had stopped playing, and the modern era of the Pro Tour, didn't have groups quite that big. Second of all, people weren't meeting in the same place for 2 weeks and testing. And I'm not claiming that what we did was rocket science or even particularly clever, but what we did was just get everyone in the same house for 2 weeks and just play Magic all day. And that effort showed. I mean, it's hard to argue that from in 2010 and 2011 and 2012, we weren't the most dominant team by just a lot. So it's sort of not the case now. There's a lot of great teams and, a lot of them have been, really killing it. But back then people weren't doing what we were doing, and it wasn't like it was that hard to figure out. We just were the ones who were doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting because it really did dominate an era and force all the other teams to adjust, and they did. And then as things go on, things change again. Now teams have formed that are largely online based, and I know that you guys on Team Channel Fireball use a lot of these tools as well. And you'll see teams fall on different ends of the spectrum about whether how Facebook based they are, basically, where they're gathering information separately and then sharing it versus sitting in the same room for 2 weeks and sort of letting the information flow more organically. I mean,
I will say that testing for multiple weeks in the same place is the best way to have, I think, the best deck. Mm-hmm. I do, and it's funny that that used to be exactly what we did, but now most of us are in a different spot where we just can't do that because of jobs, family responsibilities, a desire to not spend 2 months playtesting for 4 Pro Tours, right. And testing online and testing in person, for the last couple of Pro Tours, I tested with Josh Utterlayton and Matt Nass, who are here local in Denver. We all work at the same place, so we're able to just test at my house, and that still gets you, I think, a lot of the way there, especially the way Magic is these days.
Yeah, for sure. It's been really interesting to see how things have changed since the advent of those monster teams. Now, fast forwarding a little bit through your career, I kind of picked a mile marker for you here. Your 4th Pro Tour top 8, which ended up being, roughly the threshold for the Hall of Fame. I think a lot of players with, good clean records and a good reputation, once they hit that 4th Pro Tour, had a reasonable expectation to make it into the Hall of Fame. Did you think about that after you hit that 4th PT top 8?
That was, I think, Nagoya was my 4th PT top 8. I'm trying to remember. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, I did. Getting into the Hall of Fame, when they announced it in 2005 or whenever it was, I didn't think much of it or my chances of getting there. I hadn't even really played in the Pro Tour at that point.
Right.
Around 2009, 2010, after I started doing better, that definitely became a goal of mine. And
okay,
at Pro Tour San Diego, I played out all my Swiss rounds, and part of it really was this could help getting into the Hall of Fame. I would like to be in the Hall of Fame, and
interesting.
I think if I go for this record, that will help. I also wanted the record just intrinsically. This is me going 16-0 in the Swiss.
Which you did, by the way.
Yes.
You neglected to lose a single match in the Swiss portion of the Pro Tour, which still just blows my mind.
Yeah. So that was part of my motivation. And when I got the fourth PT top 8, again, I still think that's Nagoya, but I'm not 100% sure now. Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. That was one of the first things I thought of when I drew in a top 8.
Okay.
I have 4 PT top 8s now. I've got to have a good shot at the Hall.
Yeah. And, a few years later, you did, in fact, make it into the Hall of Fame. Had to be a super, super big honor. And I'm not going to bore you with how did you feel about getting into the Hall of Fame, because I think we know how you felt about getting into the Hall of Fame at this point. The next couple of years, though, were tough for you. It was really interesting how things played out, looking back at your entire career. But you had kind of a nasty downswing, after that. Tell us about that.
So the end of 2011 Worlds, I top 8'd that Pro Tour. That was actually the best Pro Tour our team had. We had myself, Conley, Paulo Vitor, and Josh Utterley all in the top 8.
Yeah, that was absurd.
Which cool because it was like a hometown PT too. It was in San Francisco. So we all 4 top 8. Our team is like, yeah, we're great. I'm like, yeah, I'm great. I just top 8'd 2 PTs in this year. I didn't top 8 a PT for 5 years after that. Maybe not 5 calendar years, but 2016 was the next time I ended up in the top 8 of a Pro Tour. So there was a fair amount of losing in between then. So an 05 at a PT just last year, going all 1-5 or 1-4, and there were definitely times where it was not easy because, so imagine this: you practice a lot, you play a lot, and you just lose a ton. Like I just lost a lot,
right?
And that makes you wonder if you're doing something wrong. It makes you wonder if you're good anymore. And it might sound crazy to some people for me to be saying this because this is like not that long after I had some very good seasons,
right?
But lose it, and what I want someone to get out of this from listening to it is that like you can lose a lot and still be good, and it's really hard to resist the temptation to just be like, well, I suck, because I definitely thought that a lot of times, and it's tough because you can think you're doing all the right things, you can still just lose every tournament, and it felt like that's what was happening, and this is at the same time I had some years where I had some good GP results, so maybe it was just concentrated at the PTs. I don't know exactly, but I know that it didn't feel great to do poorly at every Pro Tour. I didn't like that I was unhappy after every Pro Tour. That wasn't pleasant.
Yeah, no, it was. That was around the time when I was really starting to do coverage more and more, and we had a little while after that, and it was interesting just seeing the change for you, because the thing is that like. You did take a job. Like I knew that, Magic wasn't like the 1000% focus that it was before. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but he's still like, I didn't really buy that. I thought it was probably more natural variance coming up, a bit of bad luck, maybe, that last 5 or 10% that you'd get from testing as much as you had prior, combining with these things. But man, it must have been tough. It's just so hard to go from that high to that low. And then for whatever reason, last year, you just crushed everything. I still look back and wonder how you put together a season that good in the modern era, right? Where we've got everybody playing on Magic Online. There's so few gimmies. I hear people talk about the Pro Tour back in the day and talk about how you'd have people showing up with homebrew decks and just not really knowing what the cards did. And not that everybody was like that. The good players were really, really good. But, you would have rounds where you're just like, this person they're just not on the same page as everybody else at this tournament because they don't have the internet yet, or they haven't bothered to look, or they are against blue or something random like that. And these days, everybody has a functional deck. Everybody knows what they're doing, at least on some level. Obviously, the skill gaps still exist. And you just rattled off one of the best seasons we've seen. I mean, it has to be said, the only crime is that you didn't get Player of the Year somehow, from your Pro Tour performances. But what an upswing for you.
Yeah, it was very strange. So the Pro Tour season kicked off by me playing the wrong deck, not playing this like Rally the Ancestors deck that Matt Nass made that was really good at it being the best deck in the format. losing terribly Pro Tour battle for Zendikar and being like, well, here we go, another season where I just lose. And then playing this like broken Eldrazi deck at Oath of the Gatewatch, making top 8 and being like, wow, I made top 8. I haven't done this in a long time. This is great. And then after that, I go to Madrid for Pro Tour Shadows over Innistrad, and then somehow top 8 again. And it was just, at that point, it was just like, okay, what is going on? Is there like,
yeah,
where's the cameras? Like, am I on some sort of reality show here?
Yeah.
And then I had no expectations going into City. How could I? I just top 8 at 2 Pro Tours. I was just very lucky. And then, and going into Pro Tour Eldritch Moon in Sydney, I was playing Bant Company, the #1 deck on everyone's radar, just because we didn't find anything we liked better.
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I managed to string together enough match wins to end up in the top 8 again. And it felt pretty surreal because, and see, this is the part that's really hard, is when I'm winning, I feel like I'm playing well. I feel like I feel like I'm catching all the breaks needed and I'm winning all my matches. That's great. But when you're losing, sometimes it's like, well, I feel like I'm playing well, but I'm losing all my matches. So what's up with that?
Yeah.
And it just can happen.
It's weird, right? And you kind of get into that self-worth territory, right? Where you're like, was I ever good at this? Am I really who I think I am? It is funny how fragile it can be.
I mean, I wasn't the worst ever when I was losing all my matches, and I'm not the best ever when I'm winning all my matches. I think I was, maybe I was playing better this year. I think that maybe I know when we played the Eldrazi deck, that deck was broken. I know that confidence begets confidence, and that does have some effect on you. But overall, if you think that my play was drastically different between this year and last year, for example, then I would have to disagree.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's an interesting thing to note for people. A couple of other questions before we wrap up. I wanted to talk about your relationships formed through Magic. I mentioned at the onset, I want to try to avoid these cliche questions, because one thing that you'll hear a lot on Magic interviews is, something along the lines of like, why do you still play, or what do you love about it? And people always say it's the people. And the reason it's a cliche is because it's true. I know this for myself as well. And so I know that. I know that, the community of friends and colleagues that you've formed in Magic is a big portion of it. But I wanted you to talk a little bit more specifically about, like your friend, like Paul Cheon, Pat Cox, Raptor, people that you've really developed relationships with as it's gone. What has it been for you to have Magic around, to cultivate these relationships? I mean, God, there's got to be a chance you just wouldn't be friends with some of these people if Magic wasn't there, right?
Some of them, probably all of them.
Yeah, or I mean, still friends with them. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, I mean, Paul and I met back before we were both on the Pro Tour. We got on the Pro Tour at the same time. He ended up leaving to go to Curacao for a job, so he was gone from 2008 to around 2013. So he kind of ducked out in the exact years where I actually started doing well. So that has been an interesting transition. He's back now. He's a gold level pro. He's racked up some GP top 8s. Still has yet to get that elusive Pro Tour top 8. But Paul's just, one of my best friends in life. And even though I didn't see him much for 5 years, I think I maybe saw him once in those 5 years, he's still one of my best friends. He was just at my house last weekend for GP Denver, and Magic was what brought us together, and I think at this point we're still just going to be friends regardless, but Magic was a big part of that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right? I like the fact that it can act as a thread that you both can come back to, because it can be hard sometimes if you lose track of a friend for a while, but then they kind of pop back up and you're like, do we still like the same things that we did then? Like, are you still the same person? And with Magic, it gives you something to go back to. For sure. And it was kind of funny that you're talking about like Team ChannelFireball. Like a big part of it was when I moved back to the Bay Area in 2009, and Raptor, Josh Utter-Layton, and David Ochoa were just two of the people who played Magic there, who I'd been friends with Ochoa for a while. I didn't really know Raptor. I met him at that point, and we started playing Magic together. We started testing together. We all got better because of it. We all got on the Pro Tour, and we're going to see Raptor in the Hall of Fame this year. He has 5 Pro Tour top 8s now. Yeah, absolutely. Crazy, right?
Right. So it's just kind of insane how that went, where it went from like, hey, there's that guy who plays Counterbalance Top online who's really good, because I knew Raptor's screen name before I actually knew him, to, hey, this is, one of my closest friends, someone who I work with now, someone who I've, stayed at his house many times. He stayed at my house many times. We we're these like now very close friends because of Magic, even though it's just kind of interesting how that all played out, especially since finding someone and realizing that you're both not only have the desire to, but what it takes to like play professional Magic is very unlikely.
Yeah, for sure. I have to ask, who came up with Humph?
That was it's actually very timely. If you don't know who Tim Ayton is.
Oh, yeah.
He is
Jeopardy champ.
Former editor at Wizards of the Coast. He's currently, as of this show, 3-time Jeopardy champion, going for his 4th time. I hadn't finished watching the episode before we started recording. Mm-hmm. So he's on Jeopardy right now. He has racked it up to like something like $50,000. But Tim was one of the people who got me into playing Pro Magic, and me and Paul stayed at his house for 2 weeks before Worlds 2006.
Oh,
and he
crazy.
came up with Humph whenever Paul would eat something gigantic. So
should have known it was from Tim. That's great.
Yeah, it is really funny.
And it stuck.
See,
all right.
That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. We stayed at his house in 2006. That was 10 years ago.
Crazy.
And I know exactly what Tim's doing right now this day.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy, right? And yeah, it's just insane how it can weave everything together. Last question for you. It's a little bit more personal because I have to imagine that there was a transformation from you from being, just normal guy, right? I mean, you liked Magic, you played games, you went to school. And then, at some point you became LSV. And, you did, you became this beloved personality in the Magic community. I mean, I think you're the most popular, famous Magic player, period. And, whatever, you can have, any arguments or whatever, but that's how I see it for Magic players. Yeah. You don't have to fight me on it. And it's just interesting to think, like, have you ever looked back and, not that it's such a huge thing. Like, we have our own little world, right? Our little Magic world, but you are the most, the highest of the, you're at peak LSV. And, I wonder if you ever look back and look at yourself from before, out of high school or when you were in college or before you, qualified for the Pro Tour. And if you ever could have, predicted that you would end up being, who you are now.
Oh, not a chance. It's so bizarre to me when I think about it, because I am very different than what I was. And Magic, among the many things I think Magic has given me was not only the ability to interact with people and to perform from a camera, to speak, to kind of transmit information, but the confidence to do all those things, to feel like that people would want to listen to what I had to say. Because, a lot of people, like, you never feel like what you have to say is worthwhile or meaningful, or why should people listen to you? And when I talk about Magic, I know it is. I mean, yeah. And it's very clear people are interested in that. So that really helps, and it makes you realize that you don't need to master everything to be able to be confident in expressing yourself and talking to people and kind of just being more outgoing. And Magic definitely kind of led me down that road where maybe I don't go down that road if not for Magic. I don't know.
That's crazy. Yeah, it's great stuff, man. You've had I have a feeling that by the time your career is over, way down the line, you're going to look back and it's going to be like, wow, and you're going to think about, a couple of tournaments where if you would have, something would have gone marginally wrong, you could be totally different,
I already think that.
Isn't that just weird?
Well, see, look, everyone in life has, I'm sure, many of these moments where if a little detail is different, their life goes down a very different trajectory.
Right.
But when you deal with Magic, it feels like it's made more blatantly obvious. Like, if my tiebreakers are worse and I don't top 8 the Pro Tour, like, things are probably very different.
It's so weird.
And that's just a little bit more precise than you normally get, because normally it's like, well, you didn't know that, but had you, not gone through that yellow light, then you would have been late for your job interview and not gotten that job, and you wouldn't have moved across the country and all this other stuff.
Right.
But you don't know those things. Whereas I know that if my tiebreakers were worse, I wouldn't have top 8'd Berlin. And if I hadn't top 8'd Berlin, then I may have been in a position where I just would have to do something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm telling you, yours is going to be one of those ones where you can calculate it down to the percent. Anyway, thanks, Luis, for taking the time, and I'm gonna hand the reins over to you now.
All right, I'm the captain now. Yeah. Normally you are, because when we do coverage, you're the play-by-play.
That is true.
So I'm going to start out with like the really cliched question of what got you into Magic? And more specifically, how old were you when you got into Magic?
How old? I think I was probably 17 or 18 at the time. Like it was basically I had my, actually no, I had to be a bit younger. I was probably 16, but I had a, my best friend, up here in Washington, Jay, and, he and I used to play, but he's the only person, I played Magic with, period. Like at that time, it was just a thing between him and I. We would talk about cards. He actually took it more seriously than I did. He played in regionals once with a white weenie deck featuring Armageddon.
That was a long time ago.
Jay took it a lot more seriously than I did. I was never good. I never even tried to be good. In fact, I had a rudimentary understanding of the rules, I think, looking back. But you know what I like to do? It's really weird. I was so different then. I like to build decks. That was my thing. I would just come up with all these crazy decks. I found my box full of deck boxes. I had named every deck, horrible names. I had one called Akhan's Run, and like it was just awful. And that was what I did because a lot of times I didn't have anybody, none of my other friends played, so it was just I get to play when Jay and I hung out, but beyond that, it was just my card, so I was just building decks.
And that didn't persist though. Like, when did you get back into Magic?
Yeah, I fell off pretty quickly after that. I probably only played for a couple of years back then, and then I came back, interestingly, right around the time when everything boomed. It wasn't just for me. I think that's one thing that a lot of people overlook when it comes to Magic, and especially the more recent history of Magic, is that we've been under a boom of Magic for a considerable period of time here. And I'm curious to see how that situation continues. But, right around really when everything went off for you, for me, people talk about a lot. If you talk to people who are retired and you ask them, well, what went well in your career? What was right? A lot of them will say, I had lucky timing, I had good timing. It just, things came together at the right time. And I found that to be true for me as well, because I came back to the game about 2008, and, it wasn't too long after, it was about 2009 when Zendikar came out and things just started exploding. Which was the same time that ChannelFireball started. It's the same time we started Limited Resources.
It's a good time to start things.
I mean, maybe it's all connected. Maybe sites like ChannelFireball and podcasts like Limited Resources help to cultivate. I wouldn't assume that they were the primary factor, but maybe it's all a big interwebbed mix. But the truth of it is that, I came back and, I was playing poker with my poker friends, and a lot of them like to play Magic, and they were like, you should play, you'd like it. And I'm like, yeah, I used to play that, and I'm not really into it anymore. And they really had to drag me into it. It's funny. I said no to like free sealed and free drafts. I was just like, no, I don't want to play. And mainly it was because I knew how my personality was. And I'm like, if I get into it, then I'm going to be into it. And I don't really want to be into stuff right now. Like, I'm concentrating on my job and getting better at poker and stuff. So I wasn't really into it, but I finally did. And God, it took one thing. And then Ryan had me hook, line, and sinker, and I never looked back.
And speaking of, so you mean Ryan Spain, of course.
Yeah.
You and he started Limited Resources, and what were your goals and aspirations when you did that?
The funny part is there was two goals when we started, at least in my mind. Ryan would tell you a slightly different story, I think, but I remember it pretty specifically from my perspective. Is one, I wanted to see if I could do it. I had been listening to podcasts already for a few years. I had listened primarily to one of the podcast pioneers. I have to say his name is Leo Laporte, and he does tech podcasts. In fact, I actually still listen to him to this day. He is in many ways my hero as far as podcasting and broadcasting goes. I learned so much from him about how to handle yourself and how to handle a show. That just clicked with me. It made sense the way that he did it. And I followed a lot of his mentality, as far as, who your sponsors are, right? That's a big one. You don't he wouldn't just take on any sponsor that would come along and pay him money. He said, no, I want to have stuff on the show that either I would use personally, like that I can personally endorse, or that is relevant to my audience. And his audience was, computer people. I like computers and technology and stuff like that. And so he would have advertising for things that were relevant to those people. And he wouldn't have, random, get your refrigerator cleaned. It's like, it just wouldn't click with his thing. And so he would turn them down, and that's money out of his pocket. But, he knew that in order to service and make the best show possible, you had to give details like that. He also was inspirational in the sense that at the time, computing had gotten powerful enough that you could start creating your own content yourself. Now, this has been around for quite a while, but you could go buy a decent computer, a laptop, or even a desktop, or even a laptop, and you could start to make videos. And this is where YouTube started to really spin up, because people started to develop their own styles and their own content on YouTube. And this is where he would get people calling into he has a radio show as well, saying, well, I've always been interested in doing a radio show. And he would say, now you can do it. All you need is go buy this computer, which is not even that expensive. Go buy a microphone, which is not that expensive, and you're set up. You can do this. This is a time when anybody can make their own content. It was really a content revolution, because prior to this, you'd have to get on the radio. Like, you'd have to work your way up the chain at some local radio station just to get your opinion on the air. Or if you wanted to get on TV, God forbid, there was not even that many channels. I mean, this isn't so far ago, but you know what I mean? Like, it was really difficult to get, to become a TV personality. That was just something that wouldn't happen. Otherwise, you just couldn't get your word out. If you had something interesting to say, it was like, so what, kid? Nobody cares. They can't hear you. And at this time, both podcasting and blogging, so individual content creation, was starting to really come onto form. And then also video was becoming a thing as well, as the computers were quick enough to edit video and make it so that you could do it yourself for, not an extremely ridiculous fee. And, so this was my goal coming from him for the show was just to show, like, I think I can do this. Like, I can learn the software. I can get a mic. I can set it up with Ryan to do it. So I wanted to prove to myself just that I could do it, technically speaking, which I realize sounds lame, but it was like, I'm a nerd, like, I love this stuff. And so I love gear and photography and all this stuff. And so I was like, I'm going to do it. And then the other goal, and the primary goal in my mind, was to get Ryan notoriety, because notoriety means bad.
Notoriety is not the one you want.
What is the one I want? Recognition? I don't know.
Sure,
I wanted to get his name, into the public. And basically the reason for that was he was working as a game developer on a video game at the time, but magic had always been his passion. And he, had a dream of working at Wizards of the Coast. And we had actually read an article by Tom Lapilli, who at the time worked at Wizards of the Coast and had gotten hired there relatively recently. And Tom had written a bunch of articles about Cube. He had designed a Cube and gave updates to the Cube. And this is when Cube was not recognized. There was no Cube on Magic Online, and only a few people had them. But he was able to get some recognition for that when he went in for his interview, and they said, oh, you're the guy that made the Cube. And then they could ask him questions about it. And he kind of had a leg up going into the interview. And I thought, Ryan knows about limited. He is teaching me how to draft, because of course, the first thing that he showed me was limited, and I fell in love with drafting almost immediately, just seeing the complexity of it and the coolness. And anyway, and we would have these long conversations via, GChat or in person about limited, as he was teaching me the fundamental concepts and the things that were going on. And I thought to myself, God, we're having these conversations anyway. Let's put them out to the world. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen, right? Like, nobody listens. Well, whatever. I wanted to try this technical thing anyway. And, and I told him I'll take care of everything on that end, because he was real, he's got 2 kids and full-time job. He was really busy at the time. So I told him, all you have to do is show up and we'll do it. And, so that was the other goal, was to get his voice and his ideas out into the Magic population. We did that through the podcast, and he also had an article series called Waiting for Godot over at Pure MTGO that he did, and those were also very well received.
So from LR, I have to imagine that coverage was an outgrowth of that in some ways. I mean, that is much like Ryan got more recognition or notoriety, depending on.
Yeah, I'm glad I noted that, by the way.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I did like it.
Yeah.
I mean, that did propel you into doing covers. That is how your name came up. It was not drawn out of a hat randomly. But how did you end up doing covers? Like, what was that process?
So that one was an interesting one. Again, the timing thing pops up again. So what had happened was, as I had gotten better at Magic and as the podcast had gotten a little bit more solidified, I was playing a lot. And, my goals were your typical competitive Magic player goals. I was playing on Magic Online a lot, and I had finally gotten to the point after playing for a year or two that I was getting a lot more confident about my skill level. Now, I still wouldn't call myself a confident Magic player at the time, as far as that went. But I knew that, I'd played in a few PTQs and I had, seen some of the competition. I thought, okay, I want to get better at this. And so what I had always read, on like CFB and stuff, was go play against the best players you can find. And the best way for me to do that was to start playing in Grand Prix. So I went to my first GP, which was in Portland. It was effectively a local GP just a few hours away. But then I thought, I want to start traveling. Like, I want to start playing in GPs. And so I did. I went to one in San Diego, and then I went to one in Austin, Texas. And it was in Austin that I bumped into BDM, who I had befriended at a different tournament when we were both looking for late night, hotel drafts. And somebody had actually given him my phone number, and he called me on the phone. I had never talked to him before outside of like maybe a couple Twitter interactions. And he's just like, "Hey, it's Brian." And I'm just like, "Who the hell's Brian?" And he's like, "It's Brian David Marshall." I'm like, "What's up, man?" Remember, I didn't really know him. And I was like, "This is awesome." And he's like, "I heard you're looking for a draft." I'm like, "I am." And he's like, "I think I may have found one." I'm like, "Awesome." And so I met up with him. This was at PAX, and him and I walked for a while to find the draft. We ended up drafting on the hotel lobby floor. But the cool part is, he was curious about who I was and what I was doing. And I had told him kind of the story that I just told you about Ryan and I starting the podcast. And him and I kind of hit it off right away. I love BDM. He's one of my favorite people in the whole world. And, him and I really clicked. We just had similar interests, and, communication styles were really good. And he taught me how to ignore the "don't walk across the street" signs, cause in Seattle, we just stand there and wait. And he's just like, "Dude, it's midnight. There's nobody here. We can walk." And, anyway, and a little while later, I found myself in Austin, and actually he was doing coverage there with Rich Hagan. And I had bumped into him, and I showed him my deck, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm hoping to day 2 with this thing." And it was an unorthodox deck. And they said, "Well, hey, why don't you come into the booth and we'll do an interview with you?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's awesome." So they had me come into the booth, and I did an interview, and they talked to me about the podcast. And, I got the round 1 feature match. It's still up on YouTube, nice. By the way. Yeah. Which is the round 1 feature match is always a funny thing, because it's not what you want, right? Like, the good players get round 4 feature matches, and the lesser known players get the old round 1, because it means you didn't have any buys, which I certainly didn't at the time. And so anyway, I got that, and I ended up making day 2, and I did my interview in the booth. And then I finished my draft, my second draft of the day, and my rounds. And ended up finishing 11-4 in the tournament. I was quite happy with that at the time. And BDM came up to me, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to try coming in the booth, like for the quarterfinals?" And I'm just like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Why don't you pop in with Rich and I, and we'll just, we'll do a couple of rounds." And I'm just like, "Sure." Like, I felt pretty good about, I 2-1 both my drafts, and I X2 day 1. And I was like, I'm like, "This is great." And, I had seen the booths at these things before, and always thought that would be fun to try, but I've never been on camera really in any capacity at this point. I have no practice. I have no skill set. I have no idea what to expect, but I'm just like, BDM said it was okay, so I'm going to do it. I pop in the booth. We do the quarters. And one of the things that actually stands out to me the most, there was 2 things that stood out. The first thing was, my first assignment was to watch the draft. And this way I could have something relevant to say while I was in the booth. I could bring some insight to the booth. And so I watched Raph Levy draft his deck in the top 8 of that. I didn't even know who he was. I had heard his name a couple of times, but I had recently started following the Pro Tour. So I'm like, "Oh, I think he's from France." It was that was about my knowledge of him. And I stood behind him and I took notes. And I remember walking over, and BDM was walking me into the feature area where I was going to cover this draft. And a judge came up. This is what judges are supposed to do. And he said, "You can't be here. Like, this is for staff only," right? Because I was just wearing Magic player stuff, right? I wasn't like dressed up or anything. And, he thought I had just wandered in just to get a better look at the draft, which people do. They will do all types of weird stuff. Yeah. And so he was like, hey, I have to ask you to leave. And BDM's like, he's coverage. And I was like, whoa. And the judge is like, okay. And I'm like, dang, I guess I'm coverage. Like this is pretty cool. Anyway, made it into the booth. And the other thing that stood out to me was it felt kind of natural. Like I popped in there. I had literally never done anything like it before. And I felt relatively comfortable. Like I was like, this wasn't that bad. I thought I'm actually feel pretty good at this, And I mean, look, those guys were carrying the weight, right? Like Rich and BDM were setting me up and making it easy, but I had no idea what these dynamics were or anything. Anyway, I did the quarters, and then as it turns out, the coverage boss was there, and he came up and said, hey, we're thinking about doing more GP coverage. Would you be interested in trying it out, like being in the booth or whatever? And I'm like, sure. And that was it. Like, he's like, cool, I'll email you when we get home. And then we set it up, and the next GP I did was GP CTAC. It was the home GP. And then I did the next Pro Tour. They were like, okay, that's cool. You want to come do the Pro Tour? I'm like, sure. And I found myself in Barcelona in 2012 for Pro Tour Averson Restored. But, that was a complete whirlwind. But the way I got in, like in one phrase, is Brian David Marshall. He's the one who gave me my shot in the booth. He's the one who saw something that, in me that could be good at this or whatever. And he's the one that facilitated me having a chance to do it. There's really no other way to put it than that.
That's incredible. And, the thing that stands out most to me there is things were maybe a little bit looser back then. Yes,
they would just throw people in.
Hey, do you want to hop in for the quarterfinals? We'll just have 3 people in our booth.
Yeah, that's what they did. That's exactly how it went. And it was BDM and Hagen on site. Like, yeah. They only did Pro Tours. It was crazy. Oh, and to touch on that timing thing that I mentioned, it wasn't just the timing of me being in Austin and them having to be there. That was one thing. But the real timing of it was this coincided with a time when Wizards of the Coast was making a big change to coverage. They were really making a big push to cover more Grand Prix because they recognized that Twitch and this whole, online gaming viewing thing was going to become a big deal. Remember, this is in the infancy of this type of stuff. And they also made the big push to do full coverage at the Pro Tour. It used to just be on Sunday. They would only have live or recorded coverage, video coverage on Sunday. And they said, no, we're doing all 3 days. We're going to have a news desk and a news set and all this crazy stuff. And so as it turns out, they were staffing for it. I mean, it's that simple. Like I certainly didn't have the experience level that you'd need now to step onto that set. I had no idea what I was doing at all. I had no idea what I was doing at all when I went to the first Pro Tour, but this is when they were expanding it. This is when they were hiring basically. And so my timing ended up lining up with that.
So still on the subject of coverage, what's the least intuitive thing about coverage?
Ooh, that's a good question. Least intuitive. I think, from a viewer perspective, I think that, the thing that's hardest to spot is what the play-by-play's actual role is. That's my role in the booth, where Luis would be considered the expert or the color commentator. The play-by-play is also sometimes called the host. And the thing that it took me a couple of years to really solidify in my head is that things aren't exciting until you make them exciting. And things aren't important, don't have weight to them until you give them weight. If you've ever watched, let's just use Randy as an example, okay? Randy was the play-by-play for the Pro Tour for years, and he has some of the most classic, insane moments that you can ever imagine in coverage. And if you ever mute those and watch it, yeah, sometimes there's a couple of, pumping of fists or somebody smiles or claps their hands or whatever, but it's boring. Nothing happens. It's magic. They're just, tapping some cards or thinking really hard or whatever. And then if you watch it with Randy's commentary on it, it brings it to life. It makes it a moment. It makes it exciting. And without him being there, those moments just would have been lost like so many wins at the Pro Tour have been. And, what I realized is that weight is on me. The play-by-play commentator's the one that's where the buck stops. And the time when I actually realized it, I remember I was doing a GP, and you were there too, Luis. And I had randomly chatted with a player early in day 2 or maybe late in day 1. And they had told me, I can't remember, maybe they were trying to hit a goal, like a pro club goal, or maybe there was something with their deck. I don't remember. But I mentioned it early, and it started to become a storyline. Like the thing that person wanted to happen was actually starting to happen. And so I kept hitting it and hitting it and hitting it. And after the event was over, I saw people on Twitter tweeting about it. They just said like, oh, well, this thing happened and that was it. And I thought to myself, if I didn't bother talking to that person, or if I didn't recognize that this is an important thing or something that's of interest, that person doesn't make that tweet. That storyline just doesn't come out. It doesn't become a thing unless the person whose job it is to talk about it recognizes it and decides that's something that's worthy, and I'm going to be talking about that now. And that was a big turning point for me, because I always just thought it was more about talking about Magic, just talking about the cards and the plays, facilitating the color commentator. But I've now realized that if something's going to be exciting or important, it's because I recognized it, and, at least for the times when I'm in the booth, and because I decided that this is a thing that I was going to, kind of push forward and make exciting.
So kind of on the flip side of the things that you do, what about what the audience does? Like, tell us about like the criticism of coverage. Like, what forms does that take, and kind of how does that impact you?
It's been the hardest. That's actually been the most difficult thing for me. As it comes to, like, I would say that, and then the travel are the two toughest things. The travel, though, is a double-edged sword. It's also really cool sometimes, so that one kind of tends to balance out more. But the criticism's really interesting. There's that psychological thing, and I wish. I've done a pretty good job in my life of recognizing my psychological shortcomings and doing my best to overcome them. But this one I've had a really hard time with, which is the whole 99 people tell you thumbs up, you're doing good. And then the one person goes, eh. And then you just lay in bed awake going, why don't they like me? What did I do wrong? And it's like, that's completely irrational. And I have a solid feeling about the way I do and how it's received. But man, the criticisms that you get, it can be really, really tough to mentally overcome those. And the main reason, I think, is because oftentimes they come in forms that you can't really respond. If it comes in Twitch chat or over Twitter or in a comment section of a piece of content that you make, that can be very difficult for me to deal with. Because I'll tell you what, Luis, my main mentality, my approach to life is that I can take criticism. It's a nice thing. I honestly can take genuine criticism very well. But my idea is I like to talk it through. So for example, let's say I was on stage doing something and somebody came up to me and they were like, you suck. I'd be like, okay, cool, time out. And I'd sit with that person. I'd be like, all right, so you don't like what I'm doing. Tell me why. Right. And I can take whatever you have to say. So just give it to me. And if they're like, at the end of the day, I can make a personal judgment on that feedback. I can say, God, you know what? You're right. Like the thing I'm doing, I really shouldn't be doing that anymore. That's just dated and old, and I need to adjust. Or if they say, you know what? I just don't like you as a person. I say, well, I can't really change that. I am who I am. I bring what I bring to the broadcast. And, there is a sort of take it or leave it type thing. And I'm not going to try to appease every single person. So we're just going to have to part ways with you not liking me and me continuing doing what I'm doing. I'm sorry, but that's just, at the end of the day, I can only bring what I can bring to the table. And then maybe there's other feedback that fits somewhere in between. Maybe somebody's just mean. Right? Some people are just jerks on the internet or whatever, and that happens. But the problem is I never get to have that conversation, ever. And I want to. When I see somebody say, what is this guy doing here in the Twitch chat? I want to say, what did you mean by that? Like, are you saying you don't think I'm qualified to do this? Are you saying that you don't think my broadcaster chops are up or that my Magic chops are up to speed? Are you just saying you don't like me? Like personally, or you don't like my voice or the words I use or whatever, because I can categorize all these and then give them the attention that I think they need, but I can never, ever say that on any of it. And that's the part that's hardest for me, because I have to learn to just accept that some people don't like me. And that's just hard, because I think at the end of the day, I really do try to do the best possible job I can for the widest audience. I mean, I take that job very seriously, being in the booth and the responsibility that I carry, bringing the game that we all really care about to, a large part of the tournament loving population. And I want to do my best for them, but that's an earnest thing. Like I genuinely want to do the best. And when I get feedback, I mean, sometimes calling it feedback is too big of a compliment. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this, Luis, but when I get criticized, it gets you. It's weird how it gets you because I'm pretty thick skinned. I've been doing this for a while. I've never really been that, I can take a hit or whatever, but dude, it's weird. The airline flights on the way back from Pro Tours, I heard BDM describe it once, and I think his description was the best. He says he feels like one big raw nerve. You're just exposed. You just feel like you've laid your personality out for the world. And some people, are going to say things about you that you don't want. And man, it's hard for me. It gets you. It just, as tough as you try to be about it, it gets you. And that has been the hardest thing for me. Because you know what? I think that there's one mentality that people have, which is just like, screw them, screw them. I don't need them. Haters going to hate, whatever, all that kind of stuff. And I don't subscribe to that. I've tried and I just can't. I like there to be a dialogue, and I don't want to shut off, the viewpoint of, where I'm listening to people, even if they're telling me things that I don't want to hear. It's just not my personality. And if I had an avalanche of people telling me I sucked, I never want to be the person saying, I'm just not going to listen to you. I want to be the person saying, okay, there's something wrong here. I'm not hitting the audience in a way that I need to, or whatever. As it sits, if you ask me to grade myself, I'd give myself a pretty good grade. I think I've gotten pretty good at it, and I'm happy with where I'm at. I've realized my limitations. I know the things that I'm not good at and the things that I am good at, and I've accepted that. And so I just have to say, okay, well, how good is the product that I'm putting on the table, and can I be proud of it? And I am. I'm proud of what I put on the table. And I think that that's the thing that I kind of cling to at the end of the day, because for whatever reason, having people tell you that you're good at it just doesn't seem to stick. I wish it did, because I've gotten a lot of great compliments from a lot of people who I really care about. But, when somebody says, hey, good job, it just rolls right off my back. And if somebody says, you didn't do that really well, it sticks.
Yeah, that part is tough. And like you said, you're not in a position where you can argue against it. It wouldn't be useful. And it's not even possible in a lot of the cases.
Exactly.
Though, as I'm sure you are aware, you are the best in the game when it comes to play-by-play, on the Grand Prix Pro Tour. You're the voice of those things. Well,
I appreciate you saying that. And it does mean a lot when people that, who I know and care about, take the time to give me, either feedback, positive or negative. But I always listen really hard to that, and that does, of course, make me feel good.
How has doing all this coverage changed your relationship to Magic? I mean, you now, like I just said, you're the voice of the Grand Prix and the Pro Tours. Like, you're at every Pro Tour. You're at basically every Grand Prix that gets covered in the United States, and some that get covered outside of it. So you see tons of top-level play. You see a lot of these players. You see a lot of matches. Does that motivate you to play more Magic, less Magic?
It motivates me to play less Magic, which is sad. I think that's one of the things that I do miss, is that, like, I had 11-4, I had 11-4 that GP, and I was like, this is sweet. Like, I felt pretty comfortable now in this setting, and like, I want to start trying to get better than that, because, I look back and I thought maybe I could have done a couple things. Maybe I could get a little 12-3 out of this bad boy, and, start creeping up the scale. And, once I started doing coverage, I started to realize that wasn't going to happen anymore. I wasn't going to be playing GPs, and I wasn't going to be playing even PTQs, because if I win a PTQ, it just costs me a bunch of money. Like, I know it's a weird thing to consider, but, I played in the last PTQ in Seattle, the one before they changed to the PPTQ system. And I actually made the top 8 of that tournament, and I was in the halfway through the draft, and I thought, what am I doing? Like, I only get to cover 4 Pro Tours a year. It's a, not insignificant part of my income. If I win this thing, I don't get to work that event. And in fact, I have to pay. Like, I'm going to have to get a hotel room and the food, it's like, what am I thinking? But I quickly corrected myself on that, because, I feel like, had I been given a bit more time with the competitive Magic scene, that I would have had a good shot of making the Pro Tour at some point in the next, year or two after that, either through continual play at GPs or through spiking a PTQ at home or something like that. I thought, okay, I'm probably a favorite to have, qualified at some point one way or another. And if I did qualify, I would actually very happily play a Pro Tour for sure. Like, the money that I lose is significant, but not enough to outweigh the awesome experience that I would gain, the credibility that I would get for in the booth. That kind of stuff I think would outweigh it. So, if I were to win, I would certainly play in it. But as it stands, I mean, the last GP I played in was GP Salt Lake City, the one that you and Ben covered, and maybe it was Paul or something.
3 years ago?
It was 2.5 years ago, probably. Yeah. I 11-4'd that one too. I'm like, still got it. I play a GP apparently every 2 years, and I really enjoy it. Like, it's been really tough for me because there are a few GPs, especially this last year, that we didn't cover. Wizards kind of cut back the coverage cycle a little bit. And I thought, well, this will be kind of cool. I won't have to travel quite as much. And that's also what I thought when I looked at the calendar and thought I could go play in a GP next weekend, or I could stay home. And I kept thinking, I just want to be home. I travel so much for these things. It's just really hard for me to get motivated to get on a plane. Because the truth is, I play a lot of Magic. I just play it all on Magic Online, basically.
Yeah. And I was going to ask if you would play on the Pro Tour if you qualified, but I think after just having seen you talk about it and seeing kind of how your personality is, I would be surprised if the answer was anything.
Yeah, I would 1,000% play. And like, I've actually been considering starting to try to get into the ball game of queuing again, because it's just like, I kind of liked that part of Magic, and like, I guess the main thing that I feel about it, to be honest, is just that I have to retain some sense of balance, and in my life, and I have to be careful because Magic is such a huge part of my life. Like, both, like, I draft all the time still. Like, it's that has not left. And when it comes time to prepare for tournaments, I'm playing quite a bit on Magic Online and just thinking and memorizing and talking about, and we do the podcast and all that stuff. And I have to make sure that I'm not just like literally every weekend for an entire year either off playing a tournament or, covering a tournament. I think I could risk burnout at that point, and I really don't want to put myself in that spot because I love what I'm doing.
Kind of speaking of the Pro Tour, you now are very well invested in the Pro Tour scene. You're embedded here. Yes. You hang out with pros. You talk with them a lot. You and Ben Stark spend weeks in Vegas, getting up to all sorts of shenanigans. You're also very familiar with covering pros and that whole scene. You also have now someone who's on the Pro Tour as your co-host on the podcast. How do you think that's changed the podcast? Is it something that you worry about?
A little bit. The roles on the original show were me as host. And what I mean by host is a little different than we have it now. My role was actually to sit in for the viewer. And then Ryan was the expert. It's similar. It's more similar actually to the booth setup that we have these days. Yeah, it felt more like that because when we first started, I had only been playing for, like I said, like a year and a half or something, maybe a year. And so I was genuinely still learning from Ryan. And by the time he transitioned off the show, I had really gotten up to speed. Like I was more involved, with playing. I played more Magic than he did. I thought about it more. I was on more message boards. Like, I had started to, cause like I just had more free time than he did. And I just used it on Magic. But by the time John came in, that wasn't the case anymore. It was much more equaled out where I had my opinions and he had his, and we kind of went at it. Same thing with you and same thing with Brian, where, it's evened out a bit more. And the one thing that I think I've done a really good job of staying in touch with, but that I have to make sure that I do both from the podcast and the booth perspective, is I'm really able to view things from perspectives that aren't my own. And that's the strength that I lean on in the booth and in the podcast as often as I can, because I can always, this is a really weird way to explain this, but this is how it is for me. So, like in real life, you might swear, right? You're with your friends, you use swear words, right? I do all the time. And
I never do.
Yeah, right. And, but when you're like at Christmas dinner with grandma or whatever, right? It's holiday time and you're about to sit down. There's some little switch in the back of your head that says, all right, let's not drop any F-bombs around grandma. Right. And, or maybe it's your mom or, some relative or something. You just know that there's certain environments where your brain just shuts off talking about or being, in that way. And I have that same little back of my brain thing when it comes to remembering that not everybody knows as much about this game as we do. And so when I'm in the booth or on the show and you or whoever I'm in the booth with starts to go off using all these slang terms and using all these words and expressions and assumptions that your average player might not know, I have a little spidey sense that goes in the back of my head that says, all right, now hold on a second. You just said that if this person uses this removal spell, it's going to time walk the opponent. I'm like, I need you to back up and explain what you mean by that. Because even if somebody has heard of the card time walk, they might not know what it does. And even if they do know what it does, that's a little bit of a stretch, right? And I go back all the way back to like the first Magic I played, the very first Magic I played when I came back to the game. And I played against a friend of mine named Steven. And Steven worked with Ryan at the time, and he was in the little league that I was in. He also played poker with us occasionally. And Steven's a longtime Magic player. He's very good. And he sits down, and we start playing. And he goes, he's like deciding what to attack with. And he's like, I'll swing with this creature. And I just looked at him with a blank face. I'm like, what do you mean you swing with it? What does that mean? And he's just like, I'm swinging with this. And I'm like, what do you mean swing? Like, is that a new mechanic I've never heard of? Like, what the hell does swing mean? He's like, I'm attacking with it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Swing is slang for attack. I just had no idea. And, I felt clueless in that moment. I'm just like, I didn't even know this most basic of slang for Magic because I was completely out of Magic for all of those years. And, these words that we take completely for granted are confusing to some players. And they were to me at the time. I remember just being like, you're just assuming that I know what this means. I don't know what's going on. And I remember sticking in my head. And even to this day, I think of that moment and I think I don't ever want to leave one of our viewers behind. Now, of course, there's a certain threshold that you need to watch Magic or listen to the podcast that we take for granted. And we have to, because otherwise our show sucks.
We understand that you know the mechanics of the game and
yeah.
And how, removal spell interacts with the creature.
Right. And this show is not aimed at, completely brand new, this is what power is and this is what toughness is players, right? We have a good portion of our audience are new to the game, but not so new that they haven't had their friend teach them how to play first, right? So I have a threshold for it, but it's that lesson that I learned from sitting across from Steven that I needed to make sure that I don't leave people behind in the booth and here on the podcast as well. And I think that, me becoming so entrenched in the Magic community, that's the risk I take. Is just assuming that everybody knows who Owen Turtenwald is and what swing means and what, all these other little things do and mean. And I've made a conscious effort though in my head to not let that happen. And I think I've kept up on it pretty well. Like I haven't caught myself in a point where I'm just like, dude, who are you? You've changed, right? Where, I just have no idea what the words I just said if you're not a, heavily entrenched Magic player. And, but that is the thing that occurs to me the most as I have really kind of let my life drift further and further towards Magic.
All right. The last question I had involves the future of the podcast. Have you selected your next co-host yet?
Don't do this. Why do you do this? You stress me out with this stuff. No, I haven't because I don't need one. I found the perfect co-host. How do you like that?
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah, there we go. I earned another month of LSV.
Yeah, a couple weeks at least.
All right. As you would say, all right. Okay, that was fun. Hopefully you guys at home enjoyed that. I know it's totally different than what we normally do, but I do think it's important that you guys understand where Luis and I come from on Magic and some of our history with it, because as we learned when we brought Apollo on or when we bring Andrew Cuneo on the show, there's different perspectives, there's different ways to approach this game, and you can be successful in different ways. We're bringing what we think is the best, our most important perspectives to the game, but a lot of that is shaped by our history and our attitudes and the things that have happened to us in Magic. And hopefully this gives you, a little bit of a better idea on who these two goofballs are that you listen to every week. That is going to do it for the show this week. If you want to find us on social media, say hello. It's very easy. I am Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can come say hi anytime on there. If you want to find everything related to the podcast, it's all at lrcast.com. All the links on the front page. You can also find the full archive of episodes of the podcast going all the way back to the Ryan Spain days that we were talked about a fair bit here on this show, as well as, everything's on the site, lrcast.com. If you want to find our sponsor, that's ChannelFireball.com. I mentioned all the awesome free content. You know what else you can do? You can sell your cards back to them. This is one of the sort of dirty little secrets of the Magic world, is that you can get money for those draft rares that just pile up and eventually become worth nothing. You can send them into Channel Fireball, and if you trade them in, they give you a 30% trade-in bonus. And that means you can get more booster packs or some singles or whatever it is that you want. You can do what LSV used to do way back in the day and, sell a bunch of cards to add up to a more expensive one if you have something in mind for that. And I really think this is one of the best ways to keep playing, because let's face it, Magic's not cheap, and you're going to need different ways to accommodate that. This is one of the better ways to do it. So please check them out, ChannelFireball.com. That will do it for the show this week. Back to our regularly scheduled programming next week. We'll see you then. Okay, Luis, are you ready?
The true test. This is
buddy. This is Stump LSV.
All right.
So what I've got here. Now, I'm gonna start off on easy mode for you, okay?
Okay.
Saviors of Kamigawa. Now, I know this is one of your most favorite blocks ever. Am I right?
Oh, yeah, it is.
So...
Right. You can set the line. I need to get all of them right.
That's what I was going to do. I was going to give you absolutely no leeway. You have to 100% these. And I'm going to be a little picky on you for these ones, too. Right. I don't expect literal perfection, but we'll see. Okay. Also, I don't know why I did this, because these cards all have such crazy names. Anyway, here we go. First card, Kitsune Loreweaver.
Oh my god.
Oh, we got him right away, boys. We did it.
Somehow this one's actually hard. I think this is 1 white, 2/1 protection from spirits.
Wow. Right off the bat, we stumped LSV. Do you want to take another guess, or do you want me to tell you what it does?
No, just tell me what it does.
Okay.
I got it wrong.
This is 1 white, 2/1, and it has an activated ability.
Okay.
For 1 white, it gets... This is not ringing a bell, is it? +0/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand.
Okay, well,
now we know why you didn't like that card much. That seems terrible.
It bricked up pretty hard. All right, let's
see if you can make a great comeback here. I don't know how to pronounce. Is it Shinin or Shinin?
Shinin and
Shinin of Fury's Fire.
So that's the red Shinin.
That's correct.
It's maybe I'm not as good at these ones. I think no, this one's 2 in a red, 2/1 haste.
Yes, that is it.
Channel it to give a creature haste.
Yes, that is exactly it. All right, it's coming back. By the way, at what point was Saviors in the block?
The third set. So,
this is actually the hardest one.
It is the one I know the least, but I still know these cards. I thought I knew these cards fairly well. Let's keep going.
You're only you're 1 out of 2. You're not that bad. All right, Descendant of Soramaru.
Oh, so this is the blue Descendant. It is.
Is this a cycle as well?
Yeah, this is 3 in a blue for a 2/3, and you can pay 1 in a blue and look at the top X cards of your deck and put them back in the order. I think X number of cards in your hand.
Yes, that is exactly correct. Wow, that is a hell of a lot of text to remember, dude. And you actually nailed that perfect too. This one is Jesus. These cards have infinite text. There's no way you're gonna flop this one. We set the bar to it. Elder Pine of Jukai.
All right, 2 in a green for a 2/1. Soul Shift 2. When you play a Spirit Arcane spell, look at your top 3 cards, put a land in your hand, the rest on the bottom.
Jesus, yes, that's exactly right. Wow. All right. Sink into Takenuma.
3 in a black. Return any number of swamps to your hand to make your opponent discard that many cards. Sorcery.
That's right. Jesus. Kitsune Dawnblade.
4 in a white, 2/3 Bushido 1 enters the battlefield, tap a creature.
Yes. Wow. You are insane, because I did not realize we haven't had a vanilla creature or anything even remotely close.
I've gotten rolling now. Now I'm feeling it.
No kidding. Death Knell Kami.
This is 1 and a black for a 0/1 flying soul shift 1. You can pay 2 colorless to give it +1/+1 until in a turn. And I think if it blocks, it dies, but I don't remember if that part.
No, you're close enough. If you activate that, you have to sack it at end of turn.
Oh, that's what it was, yeah.
Jesus. Yeah, but I'm definitely giving you that one. Spiritual Visit. That's a weird name.
Yeah. So it's not the blue one, that's Whispers. Spiritual Visit. God, what does this card do?
Tell you what, it's not great.
No, I'm sure it isn't. No,
it's actually not that bad. So I'll tell you its converted mana cost. It's white for an instant arcane.
Oh, this exiles a creature or a card from the graveyard, and you get a 1/1 flying token.
It just says put a 1/1 colorless spirits creature token into play, and it's got spliced onto arcane for white.
Oh, okay. Right. Now I remember the card.
You didn't draft much white in this set.
No.
Inner Fire?
You
know what would be even better? Is if I could show you the art. You know what I mean? Like that, because at least for me, that's what triggers all. Like, I don't know how you have even gotten any of these just from stone memory. Like, you can't even see the picture. Like,
I know the pictures once I remember the card. I know the picture. So
no, I know.
I'm sure if I saw the picture, I would know the cards better. But no, I don't remember Inner Fire either.
Well, it's interesting because there's a direct correlation to how good the card is and how much you remember it. It's 3 and a red for a sorcery. Add red to your mana pool for each card in your hand. Ugh.
Okay, that card's not good.
Oboro Breezecaller.
Oh, this card is messed up. It's also misprinted. No, that's Oboro Envoy. Never mind. Oboro Breezecaller is a different one. But Oboro Envoy is messed up. Oboro Breezecaller. I know it's a stupid flying moonfolk because that's what they all are.
That is correct. Beautiful Rebecca Gay artwork.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, I'm off Oboro Breezecaller.
This one's 1 and a blue for a 1/1 with flying.
Mm-hmm.
And you can pay 2 and return a land you control to its owner's hand to untap a land.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Medium. Promised Kanushi.
Yeah. This is 1 white for a 1/1 protection from creatures, I think.
No, this is green.
Oh, sorry. I thought Empty Shrine Kanushi is probably the one I was thinking. Anyway, Promised Kanushi. No, I don't remember this one.
This card's funny. This is when R&D is just like, let's just push it. It's green for a 1/1 with Soul Shift 7.
All right.
Kiri Anna.
Oh, this is the one that destroys. I think this is the one that destroys artifacts. 3 and a red, 3/1. Enter the battlefield, destroy an artifact.
This one's blue.
Oh, so this is the one that returns a creature. Then I guess
yes.
There's a cycle. They're all cycles. So this has the ability when you play a spirit arcane spell, return it to your hand. And
yes.
I think it's like 4 and a blue 2/2 return a creature to your hand.
Yeah, that's what it is. You got it. That's our first uncommon. The next one is called Oni of Wild Places.
Oh yeah, this is the 5 and a red, like 6/6 haste must attack, or 6/5.
It is 6/5. That's correct, and it does have a clause. It's not must attack. You're very close.
I think it has to, return a red creature to your owner's hand at every upkeep.
Yes, that's exactly it. God damn it! I still can't believe you're getting these. Dense Canopy.
This is some stupid green card that involves flyers.
Yes, and I'm actually going to give it to you based solely on that. Because this is 1 and a green enchantment, and I still... Okay, here's what it does. Creatures with flying can't block creatures without flying. So, whatever. Right. I have no idea what that even does still. All right, let's see if you get the rare. This is the big payoff. I can tell you, looking at... You probably don't feel so hot right now, but looking at the pile in front of me, you're doing pretty good. This is called Soramaro First to Dream.
Okay, so every card in this set was a cycle, by the way.
I've noticed you said cycle. This is the blue one.
4 blue, power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand.
Correct.
I think you draw an extra card every turn.
You're close.
I know you draw an extra card somehow.
That's correct. It has a mana.
I guess you have to pay mana blue or something to draw an extra card.
It's 4 colorless.
Oh.
Return a land you control to its owner's hand. Draw a card. All right, so you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them right.
I'm like 5 wrong.
And 5 wrong.
All right,
That's not too bad.
It's okay. I did better on Tempest somehow.
Yeah, you did. All right, I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do this
All
one
right.
a little quicker. This one comes from Joe. Unfortunately, whoever donated the Saviors pack neglected to write their name on it, so I do apologize. This one is Invasion.
Okay.
Now, do you know Invasion or?
Yeah, I know Invasion well.
Okay.
Give me a leeway of like 2 cards.
Okay, I'm going to say, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable. Though, God, I mean, I don't, yeah, anyway, we'll just start.
I always overestimate myself with these things. So.
Turf Wound.
2 in a red, instant, target player can't play a land this turn, draw a card.
Wow, that's a nasty card, and you're exactly right. Worldly Council.
1 in a blue, instant, look at your top X cards, where X is the number of basic land types, and then you put 1 in your hand, the rest in the bottom.
Yep, man. How old were you when you played this set? Let's see. This came out in 2000. So this is your young brain storing away all this info.
Useless Invasion stuff.
Yeah, Nomadic Elf.
1 in a green, pay 1, 2, 2, 1 in a green, add a mana of any color to your mana pool.
Correct. Banalish Trapper.
1 in a white, 1, 2, white, tap target creature.
Tribal Flames.
1 in a red, sorcery, deal damage equal to the number of basic land types you control.
Tower Drake.
2 and a blue, 2/1 flying. You pay a white to give it +0/+1.
Dude, you were insane. Holy Day.
1 white mana fog for.
That's correct. Savage Offensive.
1 in a red, kicker, 1 in a green. Give all your creatures +1 if you paid give all your creatures first strike if you paid the kicker +1/+1.
I am giving it to you. The only thing that you missed was that it's kicker green, not 1 in a green, but whatever. Everything else you said is exactly correct. You are undefeated so far.
All right.
Metathran Zombie.
1 in a blue, pay 1/1, pay a black mana to regenerate it.
Correct. Maniacal Rage.
1 in a red, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and can't block. Or must attack.
No.
Can't block. Yeah.
No, yeah, you said it right. Yavimaya Barbarian. This is a gold card, actually.
Red, green for a 2/2 protection from blue.
That's correct. Dredge. Not the mechanic, the card.
Instant for 1 black mana, exile a creature, or card in a graveyard, draw a card.
Let's see. It says black instant, sacrifice a creature or land, draw a card.
Wrong.
All right, that's fine. Slinking Serpent.
This one.
I'll give you a hint. This is also a gold card.
Yeah, it's a blue-black card. I think this is the 2 blue-black.
It is.
It's a 2/3 or a 4/3. Hold on. I think it's a 2/3 like Forest Walk.
It's exactly what it is. God dang. Chromatic Sphere.
Yeah, 1 colorless for an artifact. 1 tap, sack, draw a card, and add a mana of any color to your mana pool.
Oh, by the way, of course, the rares from these are going to go in the thing, and I'll put the Chromatic Sphere in the giveaway for the next rares giveaway. It's just a cool card. Yeah. All right. I don't know if this is easier or harder, but here's your rare. Planar Portal.
6 mana, 6 tap, search your library for any card, put it in your hand.
God, this is like watching Tim on Jeopardy, man. You just ran that off. That is insane. You only got 1 wrong.
All right. So I knew Invasion better. I think Invasion's easier than Saviors, though. Saviors is weird. I didn't realize how weird it was in retrospect.
Dude, I mean, I didn't draft that set, so all those cards were effectively new to me, but oh my God. No wonder you like it so much. There's a lot going on.
Mostly nonsense.
All right, well, good job, Luis. You went 1 for 1 on hitting your over-unders, and I'll tell you what, this is not going to be the last installment of
I
Stump LSV. Yeah, we'll do it again.